And let me invite to the stage Guido Bianchi, our guest from Italy. He's an architect and co-founder of a lighting studio, author of many lights in different environments.
Thank you for being here today. We are speaking about lighting this morning, and as a break for the landscape and planting that we did yesterday and after, I believe. Thank you for including lighting in this conference, which I think it's an interesting subject. It's a difficult, tricky, as you mentioned yesterday. Why? I think because at night, what you experience outside is really a very high contrast. So it's within darkness. It's very difficult to properly light or to even to provide some light for an exterior space. Now, my first point is actually even before approaching or asking how we should do it is why we should do it. I mean, why we should light a garden. I've been asking myself these questions and it's still on the way because I see a contradiction behind this point. You mentioned, I heard yesterday, well, my feeling about the presentation I saw yesterday is that the garden represents perhaps a fragment of nature, of wild nature, at least ideally. Of course, we all know that is artificial, 100% artificial, but ideally wants to create like a transfer to a space that is natural and takes us outside the city where the garden is located. So within that environment, within that place, does it make sense to have artificial light? I mean, would that light be disrupting from the experience of living the garden? Probably yes, because you don't have light in the wilderness. But of course, these gardens are not in the wild nature, are in the town. So we need to provide at least the minimum light necessary to be lived by people, to be enjoyed. And so the point is whether to, I think, and what actually I'm trying to explain with this brief presentation is the fact that light can be used, but in a way that doesn't really overlap or distract from the presence of night, which is part of the evening landscape, I think, and that has to be taken into account. To do this, I would like to start with a brief historical presentation of artworks. And of course, the absolute metaphor is concerned about light, is because light is something that you cannot really you cannot explain with other words. I mean, light is always refers to itself. And this is one of the first, I think, works of art in light, which is the Gothic architecture. We know these beautiful buildings, magnificent for the shapes from the outside, but the real experience, I think, is the inside. This is Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, and what you see is really a great show of light. Of course, it's daylight filtered to the stained windows, where all the images and colors are displayed. It's amazing to see or to understand what kind of impression would have this experience for a person in that age, if it's surprising for us now. I always think about this, because this is actually just the beginning of the 13th century. And now iconography, which is, again, an evening the nativity, so we are at night. And I think this painting explains very well what happens in the Western, European Western cultures, not only the Western, but the Eastern as well. Christ, we see, is represented as a glowing body that is emitting little rays of light, and all the figures around him are actually being flooded by this light. Even the angel on the bottom of the painting has like a sort of reflected light, more of a colder one, that illuminates the people sitting around the fire on the back. So we understand, and through our culture, I mean, light has always been associated to divinity, truth, in relationship to darkness. We see, for example, that the reflections of the holy images around Christ is not the same than the animals and the people on the second stage. Another painting, very interesting as well, because we have a sequence here of 3 moments. We have a moon, we have a torch that is taking the Christ and through Egypt, and then we have shepherds lighting a fire with these little particles that rise up into the sky. Again, we have this story is told through the use of light. Actually, the sequence is really described very clearly with the presence of light. In more of a modern time, we are in the Illuminism period, which is, of course, not anymore the subject is not religious anymore, but it's a scientist making an experiment with creating the void within that glass ball. But all the scene is explained through a candle that sits behind that glass with that milky liquid. And I think interesting because the focus of the painting is really the center where the light is located. And all what happens, this is an experiment in a house of a scientist that is like entertaining the rich family with this experiment of creating some little troubles to the little girls, and but it's a funny situation, I think, at the end, because then the bird faint and then lives and then breathe again, is back to life when the air is pumped again in the square. More recent, this is the Giacomo Balla. It's a futurist painter that exalt, I think, the electric light with this painting that is called Lampada d'Arco. It's one of the first technologies of urban lighting. And I think it's interesting the limit that you see, that shape that this light creates in the darkness. It's a very vibrant, it's very aggressive and powerful. It's the period of Futurism in Italy. Now, to summarize this brief historical journey, I made a comparison between these two series of paintings done in different periods. We are in the 17th century and the early 20th century, but this very famous painting of Malevich painting that relates light and darkness. I think it's interesting that both of the painters felt this very strong relationship, that you cannot speak about light without talking about darkness. Perhaps in the past, in all the examples of what we saw before, darkness was considered as the lack of light. But actually, you cannot deny darkness because simply you wouldn't describe what is light. And let's go to the present times. This is perhaps not a very updated satellite image, but maybe the one that we will have now in 2020 will be even brighter. We understand many things from this image. Of course, we know that the world is not all the same. There are continents which are completely different than others at night. But we definitely know and experience that our relationship with darkness is completely changed from the past. We actually take lighting for granted. At night, our cities turn on automatically. As soon as we walked in a room, we always expect to find a light. And so basically we don't have this conflict or this relationship with darkness as it used to be during centuries before. In this context, I think it's very interesting to see the work of artists again, because they are always ahead and they investigate things that problems or questions that are at the bottom of our society, I think. And one of them is, of course, James Turrell, which is investigating the sense of perception. This is a famous work of Turrell. It's an ongoing project of the Roden Crater in Arizona, but there's many others in museums that we can visit. Another famous artist working with light and perception is Flavin, that you might know. This is a work that he made in Milan in 1996. But there's many, many of his works all around the world. Anthony McCall, incredible experience of these 5 minutes of pure sculptures that he creates, sorry the voice, I have just out of a bad cold. He creates these environments which are interesting to be experienced as spaces that creates volumes where we can enter and exit and find our position within a dark environment. Now, I think this is the type of experience that you do within that installation. Another project this is a contemporary, it's an ongoing exhibition in Milan, Cherit Vin Evans, that is a contemporary artist, and creating these geometries that represent the movements of artists, and he just put them together in a collapsed continuum element that creates this I think this very powerful image, very powerful sculpture. But I think what is behind this research, I think perhaps many aspects, mainly related to the need of, or the investigation through perception, or a redefinition of the meaning of perception, I think. But compared to the world we live, or the lighting environment we live, I think these are some try of isolate the perception, to isolate people into a more deep and more quiet environment. These are columns by the same artist in Angar Bicocca. The intention is to create a pose, to create something that allows us a sort of meditational space. I think this kind of approach is something that we should try to achieve in the project we do, because perhaps the night lighting or the evening lighting should be something that should aim to create a sort of relationship with darkness, as this installation do. Let me show you some, actually just 3 or 4 projects that start from the small scale to a large one, that resume a bit the main features of our approach in lighting. This is an house. It's a new house in the countryside, just near the center of Italy, and it's beautiful for mainly for the landscape that you can look at from this. We're on top of a hill, and the landscape is just beautiful. It's really untouched, and you don't really feel anything. It was actually as it was for ages. You can see, you don't see any main or any contemporary town or building around. So in this kind of context, I think the point was, of course, the area had to be illuminated outside, because the owners of the house wanted to leave that space in the evening, but there was no way to light the landscape, because it's so far away, and it was meaningless perhaps to light the area or the lawn just around. So this is also a third house that is part of the complex, and it's not far from, it's maybe on the rear, not far from the main one. We can see both of them. And this is the evening scenario that we try to build without illuminating just 4 elements, which is the, as you can see, actually, the pool, the bench, and the guest house, and a little bit of uplighting of the stone facade of the main one. Now, table and all the other areas are dark, because we actually is the most comfortable place to be, where you don't have lighting. The dark areas of the dark areas of the front of the house are the area actually even more comfortable to be, because you see some elements that define the space, but not, and then besides that you see just the sunset that goes down and the night that arrives. I think that's very simple, as that is what we managed to achieve here. Now the back of the house, this is the entrance. Another project in Milano this time is called Giardino degli Atellani. It's a garden right in the center of Milano. This is it. It's an old garden is right next to the church where Last Supper of Leonardo is. So it's really the downtown of Milan. And it's an historical garden owned by a private family that wanted to a bit light the garden without lighting the garden. That was the request. I mean, they didn't want to really to change the atmosphere of the space. But of course, they wanted to feel more secure. They're old people, and they wanted to provide some increase, slightly increase the amount of light in the garden. This is the other view of the house, and that you see behind a church. This is the entrance, the access to the garden. And this is where they live. So they were, at the beginning, they were kind of concerned of what the proposal or what the lighting could have done in a place like this where they didn't have any lighting at all. So, of course, just the wall sconces on the wall, but nothing really on the garden itself. So our proposal was to, again, just to light few elements of the garden. The statues that round this edge and provide the perspective to the arch that you see at the bottom. The arch was interesting to be lit because it wasn't, and it's actually the focal point of the garden, because all the path aim to that arch, which has a meaning in the building and the history of the family as well. And so we thought it was a very important focal point. And besides that, we have some other items on the right and on the left. And that's all. So this project was actually developed with perhaps a dozen of little light fittings, not more than this. You see another point of view. There was an existing wall lantern on that rear wall, and we just replicate one. So we made a sort of new element in continuity with the existing ones that you see here. And then the wall sconces on the wall are just being refunctioned. We didn't felt the trees and roses and flowers should be lit in this garden, because it was perhaps enough to light some little points that were providing the size of the garden, not the path, not the beautiful trees that are there. The beauty is beautiful. You don't have to light the beauty. It's evident by itself. It's important to create just some focal points that are able at night to bring your perception to the size of the garden and to the elements of the garden, rather than stressing the point or underlining things that it's redundant in a way. These are the arch that we had on the end of the garden. And that is a little glass house that is on one side of it. Behind the arch was when the expo was done in Milano, it's called the Leonardo Vineyard, which is a funny thing, Alessandro probably know, that was done in this house, creating the vineyard of Leonardo da Vinci. That wasn't existing, of course, but I mean, that was, perhaps we thought it was a bit improper to light the vineyard, because, you know, Leonardo wasn't even... another side of, because there's a connection with another building just next to it. The statues, just speaking about a bit of techniques of lighting, these statues are not lit by the bottom of it. So they are there's a little spotlight here that lights that one, and a little spotlight here that lights this one. So the beams are crossing one onto the other in order not to burn or to up lighting from the bottom, which would over picture all the shadows and burn the bottom of the stone. So ideally, when projection should be done by a certain distance. And that's where the tricky of light is, actually. But it's something that I think you can test with making experiments and making real tests with fittings on your gardens. Something that we ended up discovering, because with light there's surprises which are interesting and nice surprises sometimes. The fact that by lighting the statues we were hitting the plant that was just behind. And the nice part is that this plant was creating some shadows on the building. Now we don't see it because it's a picture, but when it was a little windy, all these shadows were creating a pattern into the building in front, which was really nice because it really, with a very simple tool, we generate a sort of dynamicy or dynamic perception of the time, of the condition, of the weather condition. And so that was an expected, an interesting and unexpected feature of the project. Another project with a similar, with a garden in a similar size of the one we just saw in Milan. We're still in Italy, in the center of Italy, in Tuscany. And, but we have a completely different brief here. The client wanted to have a very bright garden. He wanted to see the garden from inside the house, and that had to be really outstanding because also the investment behind was really, and the trees that were present in the garden, this is the house, and the trees that were present in the gardens are really monumental. You can see the size of the trees, which are giant trees just next to the sea. So you see that the house is facing basically into a pool, and there you see the trees, which are really beautiful. And all behind these trees was created a very interesting, I think, landscape made out of Mediterranean plants and shrubs and herbs that you can probably understand much better than I do. The landscape was designed by Antonio Perazzi, is a landscape designer, Italian landscape designer, a well-known one. So this is another area of the house. It's more of a private outdoor lounge. This is the roof terrace. You see really the density, and the trees are really magnificent. And the path around the gardens are like with stone onto grass. So the perception had to be very natural. Yet the owner of the house liked to give parties and to use the garden in the evening also, because where he lives can do it during the winter. And that's how the house look at night. The pool, of course, is a very, very important feature of the whole set, but I think there are also the trees. So in this case, we wanted to, you see the pool here and the lounge, but I wanted to rather show, yes, this image, which I think is quite important. We are trying to provide, we are uplighting the trees because with a system that is not maybe trying to light the one on the first row, then creating a second row of non-lit trees, and then a third one which is lit. So a depth, of a perceptual depth. All the uplighting is hidden by the bushes, so you never see the uplighting directly. And all the paths are lit by these lamps, which are providing an indirect light again. So one suggestion for lighting or deeply or intensively lighting an exterior space like this is always trying to avoid glaring. When light blinds onto your eyes, you don't really see nothing, and it's really annoying. So the main care has to be dedicated to trying to avoid direct glaring. And the technique that we can use is to provide indirect lighting, so to try to light something that we see. Compared to the other ones, this garden was used hundreds of fittings, more than 10 times the fittings we used on the other ones. But I think the result is the car of the owner, and I think was quite comfortable at the end. It was, I think, comfortable, and also in terms of color, I think was quite respectful for the quality of the plants and the material used. Now, the last project is a bigger scale one. We are working recently with, we have a collaboration with Club Med that is renewing most of the resorts and all over Europe and abroad as well. So the first one we worked in is this project in Cefalù, which is Sicily, and this is the view of the town. It's a beautiful town, just lining onto this little piece of land in front of this beautiful rock. And this town is, there's a strong presence of the cathedral of Cefalù, which is beautiful and really provides an incredible landscape of the city. The landscape is even more touching at night, because the cathedral, you really feel the size and compared to the rest of the houses, which are minimal, the fisherman houses. But the cathedral is really huge, and of course built by the Normans, so it's a really almost a military building. If you go there and see the size of the walls and the monumentality of the structure. Now, if you see that's where the town is, on the upper right side. On the other, this area here is where the resort was going to be. Actually, it's not a new one. Was not a new one. There was a former one built right after the war. And the connection with the town is really evident, because it's a piece of land that is just facing sea and the town of Cefalù. It's not a new one because it wasn't existing. This is a postcard from the 50s in Italy, and it's a funny one because it shows this club as an exotic thing, which I imagine the French people who was going to come to Italy right after the war to have their vacation thought that Italy was kind of an exotical place. For sure, Sicily still is. But the type of construction at the time were just straw huts, and the path were just path in the landscape with no paving, nothing. And that was the idea of the club at that time. it was interesting to see that there was a train linking Palermo to the club, just because that was the only way for tourists to reach the space. And you see how in the 50s, that's a picture of the 50s. But now, of course, the club is one of was included in the what is called exclusive collection. So it's a sort of a 5-star product for Club Méditerranée. And the idea was to recreate bungalows in that land, but with all the services, air conditioning, and all you can imagine. And of course, all the path and landscape had to be rebuilt after the site, because it was a very intensive, very massive construction in that area. You see there's lots of new constructions here that have been made. All of this is new. All of the little bungalows have been rebuilt in wood, but with all the underground services, so electricity, plumbing, fiber optic, everything you can imagine. So it was really, I think, a very heavy site for the landscape, because after all this digging, all this earth movement, was really hard to rebuild or give the perception of a natural environment. Again, this is the view that you see from the village to the city of Cefalù, which hasn't changed, of course. And this is how after the site, unfortunately, right immediately after. So again, the plants are not really grown as they are probably now. Actually, I'm going in this week, so to see and to fix something. So I will check. But I think at the end, the project really had a nice relationship with the landscape. You don't really perceive all the quantity of building, all the numbers of keys that have been introduced here. And the landscape project designed by Swiss landscape designer Gaia Chaillet I think was very interesting and difficult, because working with Mediterranean plant, full of scents, full of perfumes, but in an environment with lots of wind, salty water, and very dry. So actually, we could have some watering, but the conditions were really extreme for plants. So normally in this kind of environment, plants grow very, very, very slow. So it was very hard to have a quick effect. This is the area, some existing trees which are near the bar area where the pool is. And this is the areas, the areas within the new construction that you see. I was interesting for me to see the work that the landscape designer did about shaping the landscape, which is something that you probably are very familiar with. I wasn't. And it's very interesting to create a geography that's also with the use of rocks that were brought there intentionally to create this sort of garden, actually, and that's with a specific purpose of trying to isolate one block of building to the other. You see, of course, some existing old tree, but all the rest was actually newly planted. This is the main villa, the existing one. Of course, the palm had to be replanted, as well as the bushes below. And this is we start from here with because this is where basically the main entrance of the club, and this is where the roundabout is, where the guests arrive, basically. And so we are in the upper part of the club, so not close to the sea. And then this is where the pool is. Of course, the bar is something that is maybe the heart of the resort, where everybody gathers. Now, this is a moment where the hotel is closed, so you don't see anyone, and also you see some rain so it's maybe it's winter, maybe now, and it's very different when the space is working, of course. But the idea was to provide a very rich and very intense lighting on the upper side where all the guests are located. We can see here some beautiful rocks lit and the uplighting of trees. And then as soon as we were going down and approaching more of the periphery of the site, more next to the landscape, next to the natural part of this resort, we tried to use lower elements, trying to scale lighting from a more magnificent, more rich to a very, very, very simple, like a fade of light, which that was with the aim of bringing you to your room without really being distracted by the vision of the sea, vision of the city of Cefalù. So this is what happens when you leave that common space, common spot on the center part of the village, and when you go to the periphery, you have these low bollards, and in front of every house you have a downlight that is controlled by the exterior system. These are some corners of the area, and from this view you can see the town. So what we can this is another area in between the buildings. Of course, in this situation we thought that it was not necessary to light the garden, because the intention here was to provide a sort of privacy from one block to the other, and therefore we thought that a situation of pause, of tranquility in between was useful and necessary to provide the relax that people is trying to seek when they are in holiday. So thank you for your attention.
Согласна. Thank you very much.
Вопросы?
Any questions, please? Any questions? No questions? Microphone, please. One, two, testing. Can you hear me? Can you hear the interpreter? 1, 2, 3, testing. Thank you. Good morning. I have the following question. Starting with the projects where you had the large trees, and especially when you had your lighting devices hidden in bushes for the big trees. So were you guided by theory or by practice? I mean, people just moving these lights around to see the results. So we understand that you start with the visualizations, with the computer models, but then when you implement it, so what prevails, theory or practice, and how How is it done in the field? How is it implemented in the project? Thank you.
Sure, clear, very clear. Now, of course, I would say both. I would say both because, of course, the trees, big trees were there, so they were not planted. So that was a part of the. Let me switch this off. So that was part of the existing garden, and we decided since the beginning which tree had to be lit, and from what position, because depending on where you uplight is related to the angle that you see basically from the garden from. So the position of fittings are, I would say, decided based on a geometrical point of view. So it's something that you can decide on a plan, basically. Now, to decide the distance, the right distance, to decide the overall composition, yes, we made on-site tests. That's something that I recommend to do because we still do up until now, and every, I think, serious lighting designer has to make tests because there's always things that you learn when you approach the real space, like a garden like that.
Да.
Добрый день. Подскажите, пожалуйста.
Good morning. Light pollution. Do you consider it, and what is your attitude to this idea of light pollution?
I have, unfortunately, to consider light pollution because that's what we, in projects, we have to provide memories, we have to deal with authorities, so we need to speak and touch the light pollution issue. My personal point is that as I hope I managed to explain, I'm against light pollution. I'm trying to defend and to preserve the night. That's what that's what I tried to say during this conference today. Yet I think there's lots of bureaucracy behind the light pollution issue. So sometimes light pollution is people is blaming lighting or uplighting, especially in landscape, that provides light pollution, but nobody really talks about what advertisement do in our cities or what is the lighting of maybe cars, even car, or other type of lighting that we have massively in our town. So I think if we have an approach of creating a nice environment, a respectful environment for the environment itself and for people, I think we are fulfilling the light pollution issue. The point is trying to create an interesting and vibrant night environment. And we have to use uplighting also. So I'm against those ones who say you cannot uplight at all. Because at the end, there's lots of other things that contribute much more on light pollution than our little and soft and gentle uplighting.
Еще?
Здравствуйте.
Good morning. One more question. You know, the project of lighting is not always designed before the work has started. So say the client comes to you when all the construction has been done, when the landscape work has been done. So, and now you are doing communications, like you have lines, power lines. So how do you explain it to the client, the issues you have in redoing it, in building all these communications, and you have to do it to uplight the house, for instance. So how do you fix this problem of wiring? How do you explain it to the clients how to do it positively for visualization, so how it is going to look, and so how do you negotiate this?
Yes, it's pretty clear, and I believe this is a challenge that you have to face, or you had to face in often. I know it's difficult to speak about lighting when everything is finished, because of course you don't have many options in your projects. But if the point is that in our practice, we are always involved before things are finished. So we are, most of the time we are involved since the very beginning of the project. So sometimes even too early. So we drive all the wiring, all the engineering that has to be done. So it's not the other way around. So we are lucky ones in compare. But I think that if the client, the point that he will have to pay for it, that's all. So the nice thing about the garden is that you can dig just, to redo a line in the earth is different than when you have to do it inside the building, because there is more complicated. In the garden, at least you can make a little trench. Maybe it's easier, I think. So it's not so complicated, I hope.
Yeah.
Здравствуйте.
Good morning. I have seen recently designers using different colored uplighting. You know, the yellow, the red, and the blue. Do you use it? Do you use these colors in your projects?
To be honest, I'm not a fan of colors in lighting. For the reason that, but I can say that this is a design tool. Also, you know that there's different color temperature. If you talk about just white light, there's very different color temperature. So you can go to warm, to cold light, and there's lots of different options and scales in between. So and even if you then speak about colored light, there's a very, let's say, wide range of options that designer can use. Our approach is to use a more discrete light. We think that our, let's say, goal in a project is to make something that is not, that you would expect as normal. We don't want to really to shout anything and to put our signature in what we do. We like to see that you enter in a place and you feel an environment and you don't even think about lighting. That's ideally our best project. So we don't want to make any cinema most of the time.
Добрый день. У меня
Good morning. One more question. Do you have any specific features for winter lighting? You know, in our case, winter is long and trees have no leaves on. So I believe there should be some features of uplighting evergreens and the trees which lose their leaves, because we understand that in the summer there is one picture and in the winter it's completely different, and you can, well, have a different image of this. So how do we deal with it?
Well, I think if we, I hope you're not referring to the fact that light should, protect the leaves. Perhaps not, because of course the trees that lose leaves would look completely different. Yeah. I think that's part of the seasons. I think that's what we. I don't think light should mock up the perception of a tree during the different the seasons. So maybe if we are just considering a beautiful tree during the summer and we want to light it, uplight it, for example, or lighting in a specific way, then we should think that the same tree would be visible during winter, so that it has to be part of the project. I think we have to consider this, but not trying to mock it up in a way that is not. I don't know if I'm clear enough.
Можно выключить какой-нибудь фонарик?
Yeah, I believe. So I believe you can switch off some of these lights if you don't like the image of it without leaves. Okay, can we let you go? Yeah, we can. Thank you very much.